Well, the Minnesota computing industry is really a remarkable story. In 1960 or so, we had 4 big companies that were making computer systems. This is when Silicon Valley had people that were making transistors and diodes, but no computer systems. There were 4 big companies here. That means that Minnesota, that's the Twin Cities plus Rochester downstate, was the world's leading center for computer manufacturing.
There's IBM in the bunch, and all but one of the bunch was actually here in Minnesota. And so there is just a real depth of engineering talent here that goes back to those mainframe days.
Minnesota has a tremendous story in terms of the technology history.
My name's Tom Meese. I direct the Charles Babbage Institute. The story started really in 1946 when the Engineering Research Associates had been a kind of super secret cryptographic outfit based in Washington during the Second World War. They wound up and got relocated here.
The history of tech in Minnesota flies mostly under the radar because it literally had to. The computing industry in America largely came out of code breaking in World War II. The technology field grew out of classified government contracts.
Minnesota firms had a lot of business in the military or with secret contracts, and in fact, with UNIVAC, they did some of the very most innovative work, but they couldn't tell anybody about it. So I think that it was really hard for people in Minnesota to see what they had right at hand. So our kind of sense, our identity of being a high-tech hotspot was absolutely diminished by that. It was kind of an accident where they landed in a glider factory in St. Paul, but it was no accident that they drew on lots and lots of skilled workers and engineers, people from the University of Minnesota, and took a startup and turned it into something big. So Howard Engstrom, been a Yale professor of mathematics, and Bill Norris and a couple of other people ended up being the guiding lights for that. John Parker was the kind of industrial brains. He was the one who was able to create funding, and he had a glider factory in St. Paul. So that group of people ended up essentially with a startup in a brand new industry without any kind of designated market. They wanted to build some kind of digital computer. Bill Norris had been involved with creating ERA, also decided at the time to leave. So he talked to some of his buddies, got some financing, and then set up the Control Data Company. Control Data is the famous firm because it had Bill Norris and then Seymour Cray and a bunch of people that ended up building some of the very first so-called supercomputers. These were really, really, really the fastest machines in the world. Control Data built early transistorized computers. Then when they turned to building supercomputers, they said, well, if we can build 10 of these things, we can make it go, because you would sell a supercomputer for like $5 million, $7 million, $10 million. That was a startup in 1957. Control Data is a $1 billion a year company by 1969, 12 years later, and they become one of the largest employers in the Minnesota computing industry. I think they are employing 25,000 people in the state of Minnesota and another 25,000 really around the world. We never got the name of Silicon Valley, but somebody should have stamped this remarkable computing development with some kind of a catchy term.
History is important. It connects who we are today to who we came from. It helps us understand what's possible, what works, and what doesn't. The explorers of yesterday can help guide us into the future. By all accounts, we appear to be on the path to build something special once again.